Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving my spoiler review and spoiler thoughts for Black Widow. Before we get into it, if you guys are new here, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you don't miss any time I upload a video or I go live. But without wasting any more time, let's get right into it. But just starting off, Act 1's action was absolutely phenomenal. I really did like it. Personally, I think that this was the highlight of the movie just because there was so much going on. But at the same time, it really did feel like this impacted the story very negatively because I felt like the action was just there to be action. There was no real story within the action itself, if that makes any sense. For example, Mission Impossible Fallout, there's crazy action set pieces. Honestly, Black Widow might have had like crazier stuff going on other than like helicopter stuff and Halo jumping in Mission Impossible, but Black Widow had crazier explosions and set pieces like avalanches, all that kind of stuff. It had all of that, but there was no real story within it. They were super basic and concise missions like get Red Guardian out of prison or get Natasha and Yelena together for the first time. Like these action sequences felt like they really had no purpose other than one simple goal, which just isn't enough for me, especially when these action sequences are so back to back and they're so heavily condensed. Like mostly, I felt like 90% of the action in this movie was in the first act, which I'm not going to complain 100% about, but I still think it's weird because that really messed up the pacing in the movie entirely, just because it was like confusing for the story as well. Like I didn't really necessarily understand the story at first. Like I liked the introduction for Yelena in Act 1, how she was mind controlled by the Red Room, by Dreykov, and then she got the thing sprayed in her face, so she became unmind controlled. And that was a good introduction to her character, but story-wise, I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know what this was leading to or anything like that until somewhat of like the beginning of the second act, where Yelena literally had to explain everything basically like word for word to Natasha. And then there's an action sequence that made Natasha believe her. But other than that, there's no real explanation for anything. I will say the first real scene with Taskmaster where we saw him looking through the glasses and where we saw him looking at the screen of Natasha and Hawkeye and everyone fighting, that was super cool. Overall, Taskmaster in this movie, I don't really like have any conclusive thoughts on him, but again, I'll get to that later in this video because I want to talk about him a little bit more in depth, but I don't necessarily have like a final take on his character just yet, or her character just yet, because technically it's revealed to be a woman, which I'll talk about the reveal and everything later on in this video. But the introduction itself was really well done, showing her looking at the screen, and then whenever we see them fighting on the bridge scene where the car explodes, honestly, that was probably the most crazy action sequence when it came to surprise factor, because it literally just happened out of nowhere. I did not expect that to happen, and it just like boom, the car exploded, everything went down. I don't understand how Black Widow didn't die. This movie, I really had to suspend my belief so much. Like, okay, we have crazy stuff in the MCU, like absolutely crazy stuff, like people getting thrown around like planets and stuff like that. But this movie was just a little bit too much for me. I really expected it to be a lot more grounded, considering the fact that Black Widow has no superpowers at all. It just doesn't make sense to me how they made it so grand when it came to like literally the crazy, like literally avalanches and stuff like that. They did a better job of grounding Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Almost every single fight in the Winter Soldier movie was so grounded, other than the final battle. But we can't even compare the final battles. The final battle of Winter Soldier was 10 times better than the final battle of Black Widow, and they felt like almost the same. But I'll get into that when I talk about the final act. Overall, the first act was pretty good, well done when it came to action, but there was really no good storytelling in my opinion. Also, the fact that 90% of the action of the movie was in the first act, that really messed stuff up, especially with the pacing like I mentioned before. Now I want to move on to the second act-ish, not necessarily just the second act, but basically just the whole middle portion of the movie. So Black Widow thought she took down Dreykov in the Red Room. It's a cool premise, but it really didn't feel like there were stakes because Dreykov was already there before, no one knew about him. Obviously, the goal of basically like planting chips in like every single woman on the planet that's like basically like throwing away like trash. Also, I want to mention this might be the most sexist villain the MCU has ever had, and he's still so basic. Like if you're using sexism as somewhat like of a personality of a villain, basically, if that's a personality of a villain, you need to milk that out because that's crazy. That's absolutely insane that that's a personality trait, is just being sexist of a villain. I mean, I don't mind that personality trait for the villain because it really makes all of us literally hate him. So it makes sense that we don't like him. It's just overall, like, I don't think they made it high stakes enough is what I'm trying to say. Also, the middle portion of the movie was like 99% dialogue, and it just felt really weird. It felt like they were like obviously trying to connect the family differently, but Black Widow's character was just super uninteresting to me. Maybe it's because Yelena and Red Guardian were so awesome, especially in the first part of the movie. Yelena was a great character. Her introduction, comedy, interactions with Black Widow, and then Red Guardian literally just stole the show the moment that we saw him, the arm wrestling, and whenever he broke the dude's like wrist, that was absolutely insane. Bradley and I were talking. We went to go watch the movie together. If you want to check out our first thoughts, you can click right up here. But we were talking about it in the theater, like as it was going, we're like, this is definitely pushing a rated R rating. Like the action is absolutely crazy. If this was a rated R movie, all they had to do was show blood. The action would be the same exact thing. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, I did like what they did with Yelena and Red Guardian, especially in the middle part of the movie. But Black Widow and then I think the mother as well, they were just super lacking. Also, the villains definitely didn't get enough screen time. I know Taskmaster wasn't the main villain, but even the Dreykov guy did not get enough screen time for me to care about him. Again, the sexist trope about his his entire personality is basically based on being a sexist, so it kind of makes sense for all of us to hate him without him having screen time, which it's kind of smart on Marvel's end for making that basically a main personality trait of the villain, so we automatically hate him. But overall, I just feel like if that wasn't like a big part of his character, I wouldn't have really cared about him. So going back to the part of the fact that the middle act was literally just all dialogue, it was like 99% dialogue, and then remember when the Red Room army broke into their cabin or whatever, that was cool. That was cool, but it just felt like it was literally out of nowhere. But also the plan and stuff like that was super sick in the moment, but now that I look back at it, it was kind of like stupid, I guess. I'll talk about that later when I talk about the final part of the movie. But staying on track with the middle part of the movie, Yelena and Red Guardian 100% carried. The mom was absolute garbage, and Yelena's introduction when it came to that whole first act, her introduction, when it came to learning about her story, I guess you could say, or her connection to her family, and how her and Black Widow basically think opposites. Black Widow doesn't want to have a family. She doesn't care for it anymore, whereas Yelena still wants everything. She still wants that experience of having a mother and a father and everything. They have basically two completely different ideas of what they want in their life, and that's super cool to see, especially at that dinner table scene. Personally, I wasn't the biggest fan of the dialogue in the middle act. It just felt like it was 100% dialogue. It was annoying because 100% of the first act was all action. It just didn't balance out well. They could have put some dialogue parts in the first act and emotional moments between Yelena and Black Widow so we actually cared about the relationship in the first act, so we could start off with a good relationship or a good viewer's relationship, because obviously Yelena and Black Widow don't have a good relationship in the beginning, and then move some of the action to the middle act. There's no point for every single one of the action pieces or most of the action pieces to be literally in the first act of the movie. Again, that made the pacing weird. It made the movie weird overall because it felt honestly like a James Bond movie where they have the massive grandiose action sequence in the beginning and then the rest of the movie is just super underwhelming. Mission Impossible movies used to do this, but with Mission Impossible Fallout, which is my favorite Mission Impossible movie, they didn't start with the grandest action sequence. In the case of Mission Impossible Fallout, they had two big action sequences. They had the halo jumping, and then on top of that, the helicopter stuff at the end of the movie. So there's just a bunch of crazy stuff in that movie. So comparison-wise, action-wise, pacing-wise, I don't think you can really compare it to Black Widow. But overall, the idea is the same when it comes to the action, in my opinion. And I think Black Widow fell more onto the James Bond side, which personally I don't like. But overall, this movie's pacing in general was just bad. I'm not gonna say it was just the first and second act. The third act's pacing was absolutely horrible. Reveals were done very, very poorly, and now I do want to get into that. Now, Taskmaster's identity reveal. This was probably the big first main twist. Actually, wait, no. The first big twist of the third act was the fact that Natasha was identified or disguised as her mom, and then the mom was disguised as Natasha. Now, this was a great, cool plan. It was awesome to see in theaters. Briley and I were actually really confused at first because I wasn't looking at the screen. I was looking down for a second, and it turned out to be Black Widow. So I was like, what the heck is going on? And then when I talked to Briley, we realized that, oh shoot, they switched positions. That was dope. All of that was absolutely awesome. I will admit to that, but I don't like the flashbacks. The flashbacks really, really annoyed me. I feel like maybe if they showed parts of it or hints of it while they were in the cabin itself, it would have been cool. Also, the twist in the audience where we thought that the mom was actually working for Dreykov in the Red Room, that was also really, really well done because I genuinely believed that until the twist happened. But yeah, now moving on to the Taskmaster identity reveal. I don't think Taskmaster was nearly as bad as I thought he was going to be. Maybe it's because when the media critics, everyone tried to portray the review for him, they were all like, oh, he's really poorly done. They don't do him justice or her justice because technically she's a female in this movie. But I want to point out the fact that Taskmaster is more of a mantle in them too, because it's not a human being with the power of being able to compute and like look at other people's powers and copy everything. It's the suit, it's the technology behind it that scans it, and then obviously Dracov's daughter is now technically like half robot, I guess. So it goes into the computer chip or whatever, something like that. So that's kind of cool to me that Taskmaster can technically never really die in the MCU, and that he can really be used as a mass destruction weapon. Taskmaster is on a low-key level. He's pretty OP in my opinion. And so I think that it's a cool idea to keep him techie and stuff, so that it's not just one person. If one person dies, it's completely over the character Taskmaster. I like that aspect of it, but the reveal itself, I think, was done just a little bit too early. And the reveal itself didn't really do much for me, because I was like, okay, maybe it's his daughter. That's cool. Like, I just don't care though, because the character really had no emotional impact. Also, my biggest problem with Taskmaster and just the third act in general is that it completely follows Winter Soldier's like whole concept. Like, it's not shot for shot, like at like a little specific line by line or anything like that. But in like a grand scheme, if you write out plot points from each of the acts, the third act of this movie and the third act of Winter Soldier are practically the same. Now I'm going to break it down for you so you understand what I'm saying. So probably the first one, and probably the biggest one, is that Natasha doesn't want to kill Taskmaster or fight Taskmaster. And in Winter Soldier, Captain America doesn't want to fight the Winter Soldier. Now, I don't understand why Black Widow doesn't want to fight Taskmaster's daughter. She already killed her once, or she thought she killed her in the beginning of the movie. We saw that in Budapest. So we already saw that happen. So I don't understand why she wouldn't want to kill her again. Like, it makes no sense to me. Maybe it's because she had like a change of heart, but that, like, I just don't feel that emotion. I felt like they were really trying to convey that emotion of, I don't want to fight you, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. But it just didn't make sense to me. Like, I literally did not care for her, like, kind of like wanting to not fight Taskmaster. It literally didn't make sense to me. But in Winter Soldier, it made sense because Bucky and Winter Soldier were actually friends. We saw their relationship before. And the flashbacks that we saw between them and what we obviously saw in the first Avenger, everything made sense as to why Captain America didn't want to hurt Bucky. But in this movie, that makes no sense to me. Also, there's just a bunch of other stuff, like the pacing of the third act, different, like, probably like the motivations for the villains. Like, they want to do something that's a super mass event. So in the case of Black Widow, it's taking over the minds of all these women, and then in Winter Soldier, it's putting up a bunch of like shield ships, and then they're gonna be taken over by Hydra and kill whoever they want. So the main goals and stuff like that are very, very similar, and the main ideas are very similar in both of the third acts of Winter Soldier and Black Widow. But overall, I think that they're so similar that it really, really got me mad in the theaters, because I was like, this is the same movie. But I think I was overreacting a little bit in the moment, because overall, if you look at it, it doesn't really compare side by side. But I think it's because of the overall themes that overlap that I was like, oh, this is exactly like it. But it's really not. So I was definitely overreacting at first, but there's still a lot of big chunks of the third acts that are very, very similar. And a lot of the chunks of the third act literally feel like Winter Soldier, but with all female characters instead, which I don't mind. I just wish they went with more of a unique storyline, especially in the third act. But yeah, guys, now I want to talk about the post-credit scene. I'm not going to talk about this for too long, specifically because I already made a post-credit scene and ending explained for Black Widow. You can check the card right up here, or you can click the link in the description down below for that video. But this post-credit scene was fairly cool to me. I actually didn't really like it at first. I didn't understand where I was going. I was like, oh, it's just her at Natasha's grave. But then Val showed up, and I was like, bro, the Thunderbolts are coming. I'm so excited. And so then Val showed Yelena the picture of Hawkeye and said, this is the man who killed your sister. And so this really sets up the Hawkeye show. And if I'm not mistaken, Hawkeye comes out right after What If. So this is going to set up the Hawkeye show really, really well. But I think the coolest part about this conversation is whenever Yelena tells Val that she's supposed to be on vacation, she's not, and Val's not supposed to be bothering her. So I think it's really cool to notice that Yelena that's been working for Val. That's pretty cool to me. We don't know who else has been working for Val in the present day MCU. We already know that Val has recruited John Walker, and we also know that obviously she's recruited Yelena, and Yelena is already heavily rumored to be in the Hawkeye show, so it makes it super likely that we're gonna see Yelena in the Hawkeye show. I don't think we'll see her as a main antagonist, but I do want to move on quickly to talk about the rumored deleted post-credit scene, which was Taskmaster being recruited by Val, which would be super crazy, because I don't think think Yelena's gonna be a bad guy in the MCU, or I don't think she's gonna be bad in the MCU because she is supposed to be the replacement for Black Widow. So I think her and Hawkeye will talk it out and all that kind of stuff. I think Taskmaster is still gonna be a very prominent villain. I think maybe in Phase 4, but also in Phase 5. I think he'll be in the Thunderbolts for sure. I think he's rumored, or there's like a theory going around that he's gonna be in the Moon Knight TV show. He might be in the Hawkeye TV show for a little bit. I just really think there's so much potential with Taskmaster, and like I said before, he's more of a mantle in the MCU. So the Thunderbolts can really use that character however they want, and the MCU in general can use a character however they want. So overall, I'm super excited for the future of the MCU. And this post-credit scene set up so much in such a small amount of time, or a small amount of time that felt important, because whenever we saw Yelena getting out of her car, walking to the grave, and literally until Val got there, it still felt like it was like 15 to 30 seconds long for no reason. And then she said, "I know the guy who killed your daughter or your sister," and I was like, oh my god, it's time. So this post-credit scene set up a lot, and I'm excited for the Phase 4 and Phase 5 of the MCU, just because this post-credit scene itself did so much. But yeah, guys, that is it for this spoiler review of Black Widow. Let me know your spoiler thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.